The last time we were together, we talked about a statement that Jesus made that's recorded in Matthew chapter 10, where he said, "Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." And then he quotes out of the Old Testament prophet Micah. "For I've come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." Interesting statement. What's the background of Micah in that particular place where this particular verse is found? If you go back to the Old Testament, you find it in chapter 7. Chapter 7 of Micah in verse 6, and this is the way that the English translates the Hebrew. "For a son dishonors father, daughter rises against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are men of his own household." What's significant about Micah? Well, in chapter 1 of this short book of 7 chapters, beginning in verse 6 down to verse 16, Micah actually predicts the invasions of Shalmaneser and Sennacherib, which actually take place against the children of Israel. In chapter 3, in verse number 12, it talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. "Because of you, Zion shall be plowed like a field. Jerusalem shall become heaps of ruins, and the mountain of the temple like the bare hills of a forest." In chapter 2, in verse number 10, "Arise and depart. This is not your rest. Because it is defiled, it shall destroy, yes, with utter destruction." That particular statement, and as well as chapter 4 and verse 10, you're going to be destroyed and I'm going to take you away. In fact, in chapter 4, this is what he writes. "Now you shall go forth from the city, you shall dwell in the field, and into Babylon you shall go. There you shall be delivered. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies." So the Babylonian captivity, as well as their deliverance out of that, is something that's mentioned. In chapter 5 and verse 2, "You, Bethlehem, though you're little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from old, from everlasting." Statement about the birthplace of Jesus. So the statement that you find that we just read out of that 7th chapter about, okay, these people are going to dishonor one another and the problems within their family. Jesus quotes it to show the kind of friction that will exist within families in his day up to ours, where some people don't want to listen to any kind of precept about how they need to live their life. Don't preach morality to me. I'll determine my own boundaries. Don't tell me that there's a God that wants me to follow what he says. And you find that throughout culture, people being very angry at sometimes even the mention of the Bible or of Jesus. So in this particular book, there are several things I want you to notice. Not just in the verses that we mentioned, but for example in chapter 6, verse number 11. And he's talking ultimately about the nation of Israel going into captivity. Why? Chapter 6, verse 7, "Will the Lord be pleased with all sorts of sacrifices that you give?" The answer is no. Verse number 10, "There are yet the treasures of wickedness in the house of the wicked." Verse 11, "Shall I count pure those who are wicked with the scales, and deceitful with a bag of weights?" In the marketplace are people that are actually robbing you blind, robbing each other blind, and nobody seems to care. "Her rich men are full of violence." Verse 12, "Her inhabitants have spoken lies. Their tongue is deceitful in their mouth." In chapter 7, verse 2, "A faithful man has perished from the earth. There is no one upright among men. They all lie in wait for blood. Every man hunts his brother with a net." Verse number 3, "The prince asks for gifts. The judge seeks a bribe. The great man utters his evil desires, so they scheme together. The best of them is like a briar, a thorn. The most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge. The day of your watchman and your punishment comes. Near the end there should be perplexity." Then he says, don't trust in the friend that you may have. Don't trust in your companion. Don't put confidence in your companion. Guard the doors of your mouth even from the one to whom you're married in Israel. For son dishonors father, daughter rises against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own household. Why? Because truth doesn't matter. The thought is not in this society, in this day, in Micah's day, of thinking of other people. We're just thinking about ourselves. Sounds kind of like our culture, does it not? They start thinking about, okay, why are people making the kind of conclusions or the kind of judgments that they're making? Here's a statement again. The prince, the rulers, ask for gifts. The judge seeks a bribe. Those that are great in the society utter their evil desire and scheme together. The average person doesn't know what we know. The mass of humanity, or the citizens of any nation, this nation included, well, they just can't make determinations on their own. So we, the ones that have the biggest pocketbooks, we're going to make the determination. We're going to decide. We obviously have to be more intelligent than the average person. So that kind of arrogance throughout history that always brings down countries. Micah talks about it here, foretelling the destruction of the nation of Israel. Sounds kind of like a lot of these statements could be written in the 21st century. History repeating itself all over again, if humanity doesn't wake up. Interesting little book. Get a chance, read through the book of Micah. It's only 7 chapters long. And see what you find. It sounds amazingly like headlines out of the papers today. Please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.